This episode is brought to you by Herman Miller, makers of all sorts of fine furniture, but in particular, the Cosm chair, which I'm sitting in right now. And this is the chair for you. No adjustments are necessary. As soon as you sit down on it, it has a personalized ergonomic experience for instant comfort. It's made out of breathable and temperature-neutral material, delivers spinal support, and like all Herman Miller products, is exceptionally well designed. Check out the link to the Cosm chair in the show notes, and you'll learn more about it later in the show. Brian Tong, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Tyler Stalman, for having me on the podcast.
It almost makes it sound like I have an official intro, which I certainly don't.
It is very, very official.
Yeah, I'm really glad we could chat. We got to hang out and we got to chat in person recently, and I thought it'd be fun to relive our adventure in the secret layers of Apple Park that nobody knows about.
Well, I want to say something really quickly. This is really
yeah.
cool because I know you and I have been following for years, but it's only recently in the past 2 years where we actually crossed paths via Apple events. I think one was was it a Mac event? Was it in New York maybe? It was something like that. But then
MacBook.
It was very brief though, because we were bouncing back and forth. And then at this recent event, you and I went, like you said, behind the secret layers. We actually got to hang out. We actually got to talk, kind of get to know each other, which is what I love the most. Because, a lot of times we're at these events, everyone's trying to get their content. You say hi, but you don't really get to know each other. So, when we were like, hey, let's just do a pod now. Because now we're like, oh yeah, I get you, you get me. And it's like, this is cool. So happy to be here, bro.
Yeah, for sure. And I found, so you did a more in-depth video. You did a YouTube video from our adventures, which is great to watch if anybody hasn't seen it. And if anybody doesn't know Brian, by the way, quick intro. Definitely watch him on YouTube because you've been covering Apple, everything Apple forever, and just a good tech follow if you care about tech. But the stuff that we were looking at was, it was this cool little exclusive moment. And you had a great YouTube video. So far, I've only done social about it. I actually recorded a YouTube video talking about it, and it's just been sitting there because I was like, I felt like I couldn't get everything out. What we experienced together sort of takes some talking about to piece apart what's interesting. And a lot of the reason is because even though, Apple is opened up in so many ways, but they also are very controlled, right? They want to put their best face forward. So it's like finding the most interesting bits out of what they were willing to show us, which in some ways was a lot, and in other ways was, very precise. But we'll go over that soon. And then topic number 2, I don't know which one we're going to call the main topic, but whichever one we have the most to say about. The other topic is a video I've been sitting on for a while that I'm deciding to let's just talk about it because I don't know if I'll ever make it into a real video. It's this digital skills that I think young creatives need to pick up. Things are moving fast. Everything keeps changing right now. And if you're at the point where you're like, I know that I like tech, I like making stuff. How do I turn that into a career? Where could you focus right now that'd probably be productive in the long run? Or even if you're not that young, even if you're our age and you're just looking to improve, what are the skill sets that are going to be valuable in 5 or 10 years? So that'll be topic number 2 that we'll circle around to. But first, let's go back to Apple and relive the magic. First of all, it was in a very secret location that we can't say any more about. But that alone was cool in ways that's kind of the only part I think we can't talk about it. Everything else we can talk about, except where it was. So that's interesting.
Well, okay. So as you were talking, I'm speaking of top secret and being respectful, I had to turn off the sounds on my phone as you're talking. I'm like, oh yeah, this would be a good time to do that. But this is how secretive it was. A lot of time, first of all, there were locations that were both off the main proper campus. These were not in Apple Park. That's as much as I probably can say without saying more. We were not allowed to shoot anything. How when you go on a day in the life or experience something, you kind of want to show shots of you walking around and to give people some context. None of that was happening. They didn't want any identifiable information, even of a picture maybe on a wall. We were very isolated to 3 specific locations. So even when you talk about you shot this video and putting it together, because of the way that we were toured around, you kind of have to fill in a lot of the gaps, right? To tell the story. And I kind of just jumped from one point to another, but it was at the same time, you and I talked about it when we were there. Whenever Apple gives you access that is only limited to a few handful of people, you run with it, right? And it's cool to experience that. And we've seen Apple specifically under Tim Cook's lead really what I say, open up the kimono a little bit more. And they don't give us everything, but they give us more than they ever have before. And they can give us some more insights and details. And for me, covering this company for, geez, when you say forever, it really is forever, like I think 15, 16 years.
Yeah.
It's more about for us and then telling that to viewers and fans of technology, and if you're fans of Apple, what Apple's is thinking and what they're doing and why they're doing it, and then also what they aren't doing and why they may not be doing it because of the philosophical way in the way that Apple thinks. It's not picking a side. We both use Apple products. You and I both use a lot of different products, but to me, it's always like because they're such a fascinating company and because of their position in the tech hierarchy, you do want to understand, okay, why they do what they do and let the users and the people that watch our videos really decide for themselves and also throw in our 2 cents.
Well, and another thing we talked about while we were there is that beginning era when you were covering them 15 years ago. This is completely open relative to that. I mean, none of this would have happened. So as much as we're saying like, oh, it's very closed and it's very secretive, it's so wide open compared to the historical Apple. So in a lot of ways, it was also just this exciting moment of like, wow, we can be part of, them being willing to show more to journalists and a bit more of the process. And I think it's, for them, it's about hoping people have a better understanding of here's what I really walked away with is like the human elements of the development of their audio and video products, which was the focus of this tour. So let's start with audio. That's where our day did start. I don't know if I'm going to get this in the exact right order that things happened, but I remember one of the first things was we took a look at their user testing suites, which were basically computers in sound controlled rooms where, I mean, very simple. It's a desk with a pair of AirPods Pro, speakers around the room, and a keyboard and mouse. Not a lot going on in there, but they would have users come in, which on that day was us, and listen to audio samples of different ways of treating the same audio recordings. First of all, like what was your reaction between the different samples that they showed you? Because I don't know. First, you go first.
Okay. You already have thoughts. You can jump in whenever. This is free flow. So essentially there's a video player and you can play two versions of a video and hear the differences. And we don't know which video came from what phone or what device per se, but we do get to select. I guess, sorry, let me take that back. It was, from what I gather, it was shot from the same device. It's just that the audio was tweaked based on their algorithms or what they're doing fine tuning wise to separate the front sound from the background, to include some more or less environmental sound. And really what we as a user, and we all know audio is super subjective, right? It's already, the way that you and I hear each other right now is totally different. But yeah, we then chose like, how would we rate it? I think it was on a scale like very good, like one of those poor, good, average, very good, excellent,
bad to great
scales.
Yeah.
Yeah, something like that. And so it was hard for me to say it was great for each of them because I have different taste preferences depending on the context of the video. One was in New York, and you kind of want to get some of that environmental sound, but you also want the voice separation. I felt that in that example, the two demos they gave us, one seemed to be more raw, but the other one really cut out the background noise a lot more than I liked. So I didn't rate it super high. The second video was a man with an umbrella with raindrops, and that one, if I recall right, felt like it had more of a balance of at least hearing the raindrops and his voice separation, but it wasn't too overwhelming, and you didn't hear the background what's just like the ambient background noise, that hum. So I like that a little more, but neither of them did I say like excellent, because we only had two samples. I think these testings, they give them like 20 to 30 different samples.
Oh yeah,
so
I'm sure there's like dozens, lots,
right. So we got a sliver of it. But before you add on to your experience, I thought what was interesting is that because it's so subjective, they've got to really test a lot of people who are either keen to hearing or just general consumers, which is some of their employees, which they admit, like they're part of the user groups, to really get a general broad idea of where that sweet spot is, which I like. But at the same time, I think ultimately they're going to maybe take some of that data into consideration and at the same time ultimately tweak it their way.
Yeah, I think the impression that I got is it's a bit of a going against the reputation that Apple always has had of like, no focus groups, right? Just
Mm,
there's like somebody inside Apple, used to be Johnny Ive, is what everybody would say. And it's like whatever Johnny likes, that's what happens. They make all their own decisions. They don't ask the public. It's not the same as like having focus groups, but it does indicate that they didn't have this feeling of like a one guy around here, one girl has the golden ear and what they say
mm,
goes.
mm.
They are definitely taking into account that there are just a lot of different preferences. And what I heard in those samples, it totally wasn't obvious which one's better. It was like really subjective. It was like, oh,
Yes.
do I like that I'm hearing more of the city or less of the person speaking, or do I like the other one? So I'm going to guess this was probably how they developed all of the audio mix features that are on the iPhone 16, right? Where you have different processing options using the same four microphones, which are completely new on the 16, and how they spatialize that audio, either like creating a 3D sound mix that sounds like it's coming from around you, or how much they isolate the audio, how much they focus it in on just the speaker. And they also gave us a demo that was how kind of a demo of how they had evaluated some of these features, and they kind of used them in their own sample video that they created. And I don't know, it just seeing that video too was interesting of like, oh, like the people developing it had to go through and make their own videos and do like create videos in the same way that we do to decide what feels right. And like, when do you want to cut out all the other sound in the room or retain some of that ambience? And, I think what ends up being the most important thing is actually the default. Because even though audio mix is a really interesting feature, I really like it. I think it demoed well in the reviews. Still, most users never dig into those menus. They don't even touch half the power their phone has. But what the default is set to is super powerful. And the huge thing with that was that they also showed was wind removal, which is just on by default. So when you go outside on your iPhone 16, the wind blowing into the mic is being cut out like that.
If we were
like,
using the iPhone, they would have cut that out right now.
exactly. That like it would actually be worse. But I have a windscreen on this mic, right? But your iPhone doesn't. It's more or less exposed. So just by default, cutting out that wind sound, I think is a huge improvement that most people don't even realize is happening. But those default decisions are like everything because most people use the defaults. So clearly Apple needs to be incredibly careful about setting those defaults. So yeah, it was a bit of a peek at the process of how they determine it. I'm excited to let you know about a brand new sponsor on the podcast this week. It's Herman Miller. And if you've ever sat in a desk for work, you know the value of a good chair, and Herman Miller makes the best seating in the world. I've been using them for years. I absolutely appreciate the quality of this brand. And if you're not already familiar with them, they have a reputation. Go into any office in the world and you're probably going to find Herman Miller chairs because they're just the best. They're really amazing chairs. I'm sitting in one right now. This is the Cosm chair. And there's a lot of things to appreciate about their chairs. First of all, if you're seated for a long time, you want to be in a good position. You want to be comfortable and well supported. And Herman Miller chairs provide the right balance of support and also flexibility. So as you move, that support is wherever you need it to be. They've done a lot of research to make sure that the chairs are designed around our body's natural pivot points. The spine and lumbar support feels exactly right, and since it's made out of flexible materials, it dynamically adjusts as you move your body throughout the day, whatever seating position you're in. Another thing that sets Herman Miller apart is the quality and the warranty. There's a 12-year warranty on these chairs, so even if something goes wrong, you know that they're there to support you. And not just support you in your seat, they'll support you with your chair, with the warranty. So I love my new Cosm chair, my old Herman Miller chairs I've used before. They make great products, so check them out in the link in the description. And thanks again to Herman Miller for supporting the show.
I think you made a point when we were listening to some of the samples. Was it you that brought up the whole wind noise reduction, or was it someone else? Just more like that they didn't sell that hard enough, because until they told us about wind reduction noise removal, it wasn't on the top of my list of remembering even like that was a point that they made, right? And that's okay per se, but I think when you talk about day-to-day use from your average general consumer that uses their phone, it doesn't mean someone's going to go, let's be honest, is wind reduction going to sell tens of thousands more iPhones if someone knew about it? Probably not. But the fact that this is typically, and I say this generally, but I think you and I align overall in this. You know, the iPhone is kind of the phone of choice for most creators, right? For most creators, and
especially
because of
video.
that, right, especially video, and so because of that, it is important to lean to that. And I think as we've seen over time when we do these product reviews, I've seen in the comments a lot of people say like, this doesn't matter to me. Why are you creators reviewing this way? Look, we are content creators. This is how we use these products as tools. We're speaking from our own experience. And the fact is, whether you're at a level where you're making a living off of content creation or just doing it for fun, I do feel like lately there's been almost this lashback of like, I'm not a content creator. This doesn't matter to me. But I think that the general population has actually leaned towards content creation, and it does matter. And so I feel like they should have at least mentioned it, because I don't remember it being mentioned strongly at all. I don't know. Maybe
Yeah,
it's a
I
blur
know
sometimes.
there was like a demo of some kids hanging out on a ship, like on a sailboat. I don't remember. I mean, there was a moment in the
Yeah,
keynote, but the keynote can only hold so much, and you know
true.
they do their best to draw attention to every cool feature. But that, you know, even it made me realize, like, man, I should have demoed those features more in my review, because everybody did audio mix, but I haven't seen anybody do, because you'd have to compare. Well, I guess you could just turn it on and off. I was going to say compare a 15 to a 16, but yeah, you could just turn it off in the 16, turn it back on. One thing I would like to do, and I didn't, I still haven't, but is compare the old mics to the new one, which is one of those
Yeah,
things that like
yeah.
they just kind of mentioned it. They're like, oh, studio quality mics, which that's always been like a weird word, right? They're like what studio qualities doesn't really mean anything, but it just means that they feel like they made a significant upgrade to the microphones. And when I did test it more was when they added that to the MacBook Pros. And in those tests, 100% it made a huge difference. So I feel like I've got to go back and just do some side by sides. Like, does the iPhone 14, iPhone 13 sound way different than an iPhone 16 Pro with these new microphones in there? Because according to Apple, it should. So I don't know. I'll have to circle back and report on that later, I guess.
Let me know how that goes, Tyler.
Well, and I know part of the update, like the reason they added those two is so they could do spatial audio, because like the actual, this is something they were describing to us, is like how you would record spatial audio professionally is have microphones at the same like distance as ears that are, or well, no, they were talking about the x-axis ones. Basically you need microphones that are like split evenly and are in precise locations and the right distance apart. And an iPhone is just sort of, you know, it's the size and everything is optimized in an iPhone to fit in your hand and to be a good iPhone size, not optimal microphone distance. So they kind of need to work with that distance as best they can and turn that into a spatial audio mix. So that means that, you know, if you're wearing a Vision Pro, you're going to hear kind of 360 sound that is shockingly convincing. Like it really, I'm still always surprised when you just put some like AirPods in and move your head around. It's like, oh, it really does sound like it's all around you.
Really good.
But they, you know, have to make that work on a tiny device with relatively cheap, small microphones that I'm always shocked how well they did. But then we moved into the other testing area, the anechoic chamber, and I really liked your segment on that in your video. What was your experience? Like, how did that feel to you walking into a room with no echo?
So personally, this is the first time. I don't know if you've ever been in one, but this is the first time I've actually
I
ever
have not.
been in an anechoic chamber at all. And so some of the cool things that were fascinating about it is this is a room. Of course, it's a not only noise proof, but there's no echo whatsoever. But this is a room that is not grounded to any foundation. It's essentially suspended, a room within a room that is suspended when you just talk about the frame of the walls, because they don't want anything like vibrations from the foundation to affect the noise. So you have these support beams that have this room floating in place, and then within the room, right, for those of you that watch Tyler's video or mine, you could even with the floor that you're standing on is a wire mesh, because below you it also has to have sound absorbing material. So these wedges that absorb the sound, there was like a perforated film under there. You yourself and everything in that room, whether it's on a stand or not on this wire mesh floor, are essentially also suspended in this room, because all of the sound that you make is absorbs it all. It was I've read about things where people have can't spend more than like I think it was like 10 or 15 minutes in these rooms because you hear nothing and it's unnatural and you start hearing like your heartbeat. We didn't Apple didn't put us through those paces, okay, for the record.
Yeah. But,
But
I had heard about that too, and I was thinking about it when we walked in, and I didn't feel any of that in the time we had. Like
yeah.
there was, you know, we each had a few minutes alone in there, and I was like remembering hearing that as we did it, and I was fine. But it is incredibly silent, and like you say, the mesh floor that really I didn't know that was the case. Like you're not on the ground either. You're not touching anything along with the whole rest of the room.
Yeah, I think because we were with people, we probably didn't focus in on it. And it was weird. At the same time, there were multiple people speaking. It is weird to hear, not weird, it's fascinating. It's cool to hear sound where there literally is no echo. But again, we weren't left with the longest time you and I stayed in that room was to shoot our video, which might have been 5 to 10 minutes tops while walking around shooting a few shots, maybe even more like 5 minutes. Do we want to talk about just kind of some of the hardware inside it? Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Well, I wish I knew more about it, but we got to
Oh
see.
yeah, I mean we can talk about what
like,
we know.
yeah, totally. But I'm like looking at it, I'm like, what are these speakers? How do I get these in my room? Yeah, there's this like crazy arch of speakers on one side and on the other side, microphones. And one of the questions I asked is like, what? I mean, and basically whatever they're measuring. So there was an iPhone in there. Well, we were that would turn around. So it's measured by like, they'll send out an audio signal along that arch and listen to how it's picked up, either listening through the microphones on the iPhone, or if they're using a speaker to measure that, then they're going to use the microphones in the room. And I had kind of always imagined like, oh, they'd project the audio from all sides, but they're like, no, we just need to do it from one side, take measurements of 360 degrees. It's probably even less than that. They probably do like 180 degrees, just moving it some amount every time. And then they construct a model, and there's like some little graphics on one of the walls of like what these audio models look like. And like, if you've ever seen on the back, when you buy a microphone, there'll be little logo shapes of like, is this a omnidirectional or is this bidirectional, or, how is it capturing the sound? And they had those like in full 3D data renderings. So not just an illustration, but like, no, like this, all of these are data points. And they're like, this is how the input comes into, let's say the iPhone. And then we need to reconstruct the model and move those data points so they end up in the shape that we want. And I'm like, wow, you can do that? Like, it was,
Yeah, that was fascinating because the data that they have is a sphere, right? They create a spherical sound profile. I can't remember the terminology that was used, but it's basically the spherical sound profile that's used in virtual reality sound composition as well. You can say spatial audio, but they had a specific term for it. But Apple is then from that data fine tuning it, and if we looked at it as a sphere, reshaping that stuff so it becomes a different shape that is tuned to, I guess we could call it Apple signature sound. We don't
yeah.
they didn't have a name for it, but they wouldn't even, I asked to show a demo of what it's recording and how Apple is shaping it. They wouldn't even let us record that image that was on that screen because they said there's proprietary information.
Totally, yeah, it's all proprietary.
Right? So, right, it's all proprietary, right?
Yeah.
We're just talking about what we saw.
That was one answer I got out of them. Though, was I was like, is this anechoic chamber is it proprietary? Like, is this a special Apple chamber? And the answer was a little bit like, well, not like, this is a known technology. Like this style of chamber has been developed years ago, and it's known how to do this well. So just having a room of that effect isn't the secret sauce for Apple. It's what they do with that data. So it probably is those images on that we briefly saw that like, oh, that's the secret sauce.
That was the chef's recipe right there, right?
Yes, exactly.
That was the Colonel's.
So
is it 15? Is it 15 spice recipe for KFC fried chicken? That was
yeah,
their.
Except in this case, it's like 100 billion spice audio recipe.
Yeah. Also, on the flip side, in that room, that's also, they said they did have multiple anechoic chambers, but this room was the largest one they had. So Tyler talked about that arch that had the or that had the speakers. There was also another arch pretty much a vertical arc. Think of like longitude, latitude, one of those vertical arches in a sphere. They also had another one in there that had microphones. So think about reverse. Initially, the iPhone was getting sent audio to test their microphones. This is also the room where they tested the HomePod, where they put the HomePod in the center, and now they have microphones recording that spherical sound profile. And what I thought about, or I remember when I first heard the very specifically HomePod Gen 1, that thing sounded pretty incredible to me and the specific word that I used was like presence, because no matter where you put it, and they have sensors in it to detect where the sound is bouncing from. It had a nice mids, nice highs, a deep enough bass, but the sound sounded at times like a person was almost, I know it sounds silly to say, like in a room with you, and it had this sense of presence. And it was that room where they basically recorded that data, manipulated that data, and then factor in the walls in your home to give you that optimal presence sound. And so not only did they use that to test the iPhone microphones, it's the same room they used for the HomePod acoustics or audio. And it then takes me back to how Apple has evolved from just a phone and a tablet and a laptop company to quite honestly a legitimate audio player, right?
Yeah,
Specifically with the
one of the
AirPods,
best and
right?
biggest in the world. Yeah.
Best, biggest, hands, I think, top selling wireless earbuds. And yeah, the HomePod is in the top seller, but man, that thing sounds great. It was also expensive for its price, but yeah, it was.
That's one thing I kept thinking about while I was there. If anybody listened to the last episode of the podcast, we named the AirPods Pro the top tech product of the last decade. And
I
mean, it's
agree.
like really, like what can top them? They completely changed the way that I use headphones. They stopped my search for headphones. Like I was always testing new headphones, hoping I'd find the perfect set. And I thought my perfect headphones someday would be some big cans that have the most incredible, profile, but they'd be over ear and it cost $1,200, $2,000. Like headphones get expensive. And turns out it's, a few $100 set of portable AirPods Pro. Just totally changed the way that I listen to everything. I mean, including recording this podcast right now. So what I
Yeah,
kept
you and I
thinking
both.
while I was there, and like chatting with people and meeting, the audio team and being like, you guys did this. Like you made such an awesome product that I just have so much respect for and use every day. And so, that was just cool.
You're just loving the tech, man. I mean, this is the
Yeah,
thing. We are
exactly.
we are both fans of technology, and when you see it performed at the highest level by a company like Apple, and we're including other companies as well, right? There's
Of
plenty
course.
of
Yeah.
other companies in their fields, but man, it's pretty awesome because you and I are curious about this stuff, and it's fun. They talk about. To me, this is not a reality distortion field. This is actually, quite honestly, a little bit of the opposite. Apple, yes, they are guiding us on a tour, but they're just showing us what they're doing, telling us the interesting nuggets of it, letting us ask questions, and it's us up to report on them. It's nothing like a keynote where they feed you information. People are applauding on certain parts, so you kind of go like, yeah, this was very, to me, the rawest form of presenting, hey, this is what we're doing.
Yeah. I think if like an average viewer that didn't have a heavy interest in audio video stuff just like went on that tour, it wouldn't have any of the hype of a keynote. Like you have to know what to look for to appreciate like, oh, that's cool. That's impressive. So it was almost in the subtleties. And hey, if Sony wants to bring me to their anechoic chambers, I'm all ears. I'll happy tour any production that anybody wants to show off.
Tyler, I mean, it could be maybe their camera facilities,
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I know
their
Leica's
lens
been giving some tours
making.
lately. Yeah. I'll free up some time in my schedule. Well, and the other big piece that we saw, which this is kind of what we could show the least from, but I found the most
Yeah,
interesting,
yeah.
was the video validation lab. And what this was overall is like, as you walk into it, it is a movie theater. Like it 100% has the feeling of walking into a commercial movie theater. But then as you go in, it's much smaller. The screen I don't know, it'd be like maybe the smallest commercial
Yeah,
theater
yeah,
you've ever been in,
yeah,
or the
yeah, yeah,
biggest home theater you've ever been in,
yeah,
somewhere
yeah,
in
yeah.
that
Good call,
in
good
that
call,
range.
good call.
But what they described and then showed us is that it's basically state of the art Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, like meets every current top Dolby spec, because that is what the iPhone especially is striving for, both in terms of how it captures video and how it plays it back. And yeah, what did you think of that the Dolby demo in there? Like it for me, that was the I think that was the best theater I've probably been in. Like, did you find it impressive, or was it just another theater?
I mean, okay. I did find it impressive, but I'm like a movie theater junkie. A while ago, I did a video specifically on like an IMAX theater versus a Dolby Cinema theater, and
Yeah,
what
yeah,
are the
yeah.
differences and what are the advantages. This is like years ago, and
Oh, I
so
didn't
I
see that.
love
I got
this
to see that
stuff.
video. Yeah.
It's a long time ago, but it's actually holds true today, which I love when that happens. But it was great to see. I was okay, Tyler. I'm just telling you, I wasn't blown away by the
Yeah.
theater, but to your point, I thought it actually did the least justice because we could barely show anything. Like
Yes.
we there was a little mini kind of lab. Like if you were sitting in the far back, let's say 5 rows of a movie theater, the smallest theater that you have. But again, this was a Dolby Vision state of the art theater. There was a computer set up, a rig. We couldn't go back to see what they were doing. What they did present us was, and they were trying to get this effect across, and I think our cameras actually did not do it justice because of how it translates. But they had iPhones laid out in a row, and they matched what was being the signal being sent from on a theater screen to what we see on an iPhone screen. And there's a few caveats that make this really interesting. One, they didn't like handpick the iPhones that they chose. There were Pros, there were iPhone 16s, there were 16 Pluses. They told us they just opened some up and set them up. Two, the accuracy and representation of what we saw on the phone screen versus the big screen was, you and I are like junkies, but was nearly indistinguishable. Maybe a little bit of color temperature difference. And when I say little bit, like 2 points off, but the clarity, the intensity of the HDR quality on not only the phone, but the theater, that to me, that was on point. And the fact that I said, okay, did you calibrate these displays for certain brightness? No, they said they're using the auto display, the auto brightness on display based on the environment. And that's another thing I took. I was like, damn, these are really good displays, whether it's in a bright condition, which we know they've raised the nits level, but just to be able to replicate exactly what we see on a truly specced out theater screen on your phone gave me a little bit more appreciation for the phone, because you always hear it and they always say, oh, it's the best out of this. And you and I as video creators, that matters to us. But to see it, I was like, okay, this is pretty awesome.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we saw there is at the heart of why Apple really dominates the creative space. They are, sometimes they have the best camera. At other times, Google's had a better camera for a moment. Samsung has a great camera. I think Apple's generally been ahead in terms of video the whole time. But,
Absolutely.
there isn't complete dominance all the time, except in terms of color accuracy. It's not that the displays are better on an iPhone than on a Samsung. It's the color management, and that their pipeline is all intended to be controlled in a objective sense. It's not about like, oh, let's just boost the vibrance a little so that when you look at it in the store, it's a little sexier. It's like, no.
Samsung.
This is,
I know you're
we're
talking about
looking at
Samsung right now, Tyler.
Yeah. I mean, when you're looking at a reference display, like Apple's not exactly the same as a reference display, but they're using the same methods to determine what a good display is. And anybody in creative production, like that is what you want. You do not want any flavor added by your display device. Like just give it to me raw, right? Give me what it looks like. And then I can make, if I'm manipulating it, I can make educated decisions about how I'm going to change the contrast. Because if my display is adding contrast and then I don't add enough because it looks too contrasty, now someone else's display will see a flatter image, right? This is why reference displays matter. And like you say, our cameras could not do it service. That was the most frustrating part.
Yes.
What I recorded of it, I'm like, they kind of look different in my video.
They did with
and
me too.
And I'm looking in person, I'm like, no, but because I was looking at my recording and their phone at the same time, like, this is not what I'm seeing. Like it's not recording it the same way. And I don't know. I mean, that's, something about the interaction between camera and display, but I promise what we saw, like you keep looking back and forth between iPhone and theater display and you're like, this is very close. That was impressive.
I think you and I both might have referenced that in our video. Like, okay, this hopefully something along the lines of hopefully this does it justice. If there is a difference, I can tell you that it looked pretty spot on, in real life. And to your point, just to add on, you know, I remember back in the day, earlier on, before maybe we cared about as much as like these being creative tools. And I always remember taking pictures on Samsung phones and being like, man, they look so like on your screen. You're like, wow, this really pops off the screen. And then you download the file and you download maybe another file from a similar camera or a different phone camera, and you put it then on the same display that is a more neutral reference level display, and it looks totally different. That Samsung photo does not pop at all. And you're like, wait, like, so all that extra stuff there, a general consumer's like, wow, my pictures look so great, but the actual file that you take off and then maybe send to your friend will not look as great as it did on that display. And so when you're creating any type of content, we know how many people are in the on the IGs and the TikToks and YouTube. Like, that does matter because
Yep.
I don't want an oversaturated video when that's not my intention. And so these things do matter in the scheme of things, at least from any level of content creation. And that's why the match was like, oh, it I was really like, oh wow, it really does match.
I mean, not that long ago, like you had to get the professional reference display, and
Yes.
Mac displays, Apple displays in general, have now gotten to the point where they are close enough, except for like that tiny sliver of if you need to know that movie theaters will display in a certain way. The way that HDR is displayed in reference displays is kind of different. Like, but it's like it's slivers of pro use need those high end reference displays, and most professional creators can do absolutely everything on, especially like the MacBook Pro displays right now, which are just incredible. One pro detail I did get out of them that was like, I don't know, not exclusive, but something that I didn't know going into it, and I was very glad I could get this question answered, was I was just wondering, like, if you're color grading, I had heard some advice that aiming for gamma 2.2, this is so like nitty gritty,
No,
aiming
goodness,
for
I love
gamma
this.
2.2 can be a bit preferable for if you're just like doing all digital and you're never going to go to like TV, because what we usually do is gamma 2.4, which is the TV standard and the more old school standard. And to not go any deeper, the clarity I got was continue using 2.4, and that's how you'll be best off. So if anybody has wondered and heard that same advice, stick with gamma 2.4, which I think most people already are. But it was just good to have that little bit of clarity from somebody that knows.
Yeah, and also, I mean, one thing that I thought was interesting, and when we talk about similar to the audio testing, and in a way, I guess you could say using crowdsourcing it or using focus groups, they said that weekly they basically have their team go out and shoot roughly, I mean, I don't know how accurate this is, but thousands of hours of video so that they can continue to match it up, and they're constantly doing that. And I'm like, wow, God bless those people, because I don't think I could do that every week, right? Like over and over and over. But it leans into the fact of like how much they actually care about this stuff. And I'm not saying that other companies do not care about what they're doing, but this matters in the scheme of things, and you start seeing like these little things do add up in the final product. And I was like, it was just, again, when we're taken behind the scenes to see this stuff, it really does give us more of an appreciation. And so for me, I was trying to translate some of that, because I think ultimately the fact that the phone that I have can record video for me, but it can also record video for my mom, and it's the same like thing at such, either used at such a high level or used as a basic level. Like, we take this stuff for granted, man. We take it for granted.
Absolutely. And that it is the same capture device and display device all the way through. So your mom's home videos or the Apple keynotes or 28 years later, or what you see on Instagram, or like, or when you watch a movie from the Apple store on your phone or whatever, like it's all one device, and the pipeline is taken care of. And that's kind of what we're seeing, is that like hand holding of the image and audio pipeline that gives it that precision. That is like why we keep going back to Apple products. But yeah, no,
This
it was
is
a great
for the record, people listening. This is not an Apple ad. For the record.
And that is even part of the challenge of like
Yes.
doing yeah, it's part of the challenge of like, anytime you get access to an extra Apple thing, it's like, well, I don't want it to just be an Apple ad, but I already prefer Apple for all these reasons, you know? So I think people listening that get it will get it. And people that will think we're shills for being excited about it will still think that. I mean, you can't talk them out of it. But I'd just say like, I'd be just as excited to see how Samsung does it, or anyone else. So, but I wouldn't be just as, I'm more excited to see how Apple does it because I think they do it better.
He's keeping it one. He's keeping it 100. I think that going behind the scenes of all these places, like for example, I think not. I think someone had wrote me like, oh, you're just doing this because Apple. Look, you and I have both proven if given the opportunity to cover these things in this way, we'll go. We will, right? If time and schedule allows, and that like we were not paid for any of this. Like we went and covered.
And there's nothing we need to say or not say, or well, other than where it is. But like other than that, we're just able to chat about it however we want. It's just I cover Apple products because it's my choice, my product of choice. Like I think they do the best job at a lot of things, so I continue using them because they blow away the competition in so many ways. So
yeah, and for content creation, chef's kiss, man.
Couldn't have said it better. Well, let's circle around to topic 2, which we haven't chatted about yet. It's going to be all off the cuff, but I'll kick it off because it's what I had been thinking about. And this is kind of like what skills are going to matter in the future, because it is so challenging. Like you said, we've both been doing this for a long time. The longer you've been doing it, things move so quickly that it becomes harder to give advice because the world is completely different. But that I don't think is the same as advice not being useful. Like clearly there's good and bad advice of, like where to put your time and attention. So I'm gonna try to do my best to steer any aspiring nerds towards a bright future. And I wanted to start off with just a super basic one that I think I wanted to focus on because I think there's becoming an underappreciation for it, and that's file management. The basic idea of like knowing where things are stored in your file system, how backed up are they, like redundancy in general, or the idea of validation, like do you know that those files have no levels of corruption in them? Do you know how to structure your folders so that it's not a complete mess on your desktop? I mean, a lot of this I think for like Gen Zennials, it's like not, we're fed a lot of this in, even high school, and like this was ground into us. But if you grew up using an iPhone or iPad, it may not seem obvious why it's so important. A lot of the file management's done for you, right? You got an image library and it just handles it all, and you search. AI is going to be like that too. You're going to, as it is more integrated into our file systems, you'll just have, your bigger pool of, let's say, photos. You can search through all of them. But I am absolutely convinced that if you don't have any understanding of this, you're going to struggle for years to come.
I mean, I'm probably not the best file manager, but I have my own system that works for me, right? And maybe that's more important than anything else, that you at least have some level of a system that is understandable and identifiable. And the biggest thing is, I mean, I don't know about you, but because of the amount of video that I put up, I mean, I kind of have drives now that have stuff that like a separate drive from years ago, because I just can't fit everything on one drive. And
even your drives
you want
have
the redundancy,
drives.
you want the RAID array and stuff like that to have the redundancy. If this is something that, how about this? If this is something that, I'm not saying take it so seriously, but if this is something that you want to take seriously enough to potentially be an actual career path for you, and something that you want to like really feel like, I want to go for this, you've got to do that. You've got to think about that. You've got to have that.
It's not just for video creators too. I mean, like any type of
yes,
you're making it. You're right. Writers as well. Like whatever it is. Like there's a principle in coding that as you put notes throughout your code, always assume that like there's a future version of you that is going to be reading these notes, or your file names or looking at your file structure, trying to understand what you did and has no idea why you did it. You don't remember where you put anything. And you have to be able to just look at the titles of folders, the titles of files, and at a glance still understand like, oh, I know what that is. Right. So
Yeah.
being
Yeah.
like specific enough about that.
Very
I feel like
specific.
another lost art is just troubleshooting, period. Which I feel like I can brush over that one kind of quickly, but, just like the skill of being able to solve problems is like, I don't know, it's what I spend half of my time doing. It's actually all I was doing before we started recording and I didn't succeed,
I
but
was gonna say you were troubleshooting before this podcast, bro.
yeah, my skills could use some work apparently. Never got my camera going correctly, but hopefully there's still a video file at the end of this podcast.
At
But
least we're recording on our own side, so there's some redundancy there.
yes, redundancy is another general skill. But the troubleshooting is actually something that I found AI to be more and more useful for. It's one of the main things I've been opening ChatGPT for. Is like, I mean, I tried it just now and didn't have time to keep going through, but it's like this. I'm having this application is not saving to this folder. I'm getting this error. Help me walk through it. And the thing is, it's referencing all the websites of people having arguments about this on forums and trying to troubleshoot on their own. But it will write it in a structured way to give you a step-by-step play-by-play. The downside is that you're not building those troubleshooting skills yourself, but it does a better job, I find, than Google at suggesting what you might want to do next. I've just found that so useful.
These are, I like how you're like, oh, what are the skills that you have? And I first thought you were going to first talk about more like technical, like manual skills. And you're like, no, I'm telling you like the fundamentals right now.
Yeah, well,
basic fundamentals, right?
Yes. I think
which is important.
They matter.
They do
But what
matter.
do you have any? So like, yeah, you had some things in mind. What do you think people should be learning? Forget
Okay,
what I said.
so no. I'm gonna get to some actual skill things, but this is the thing that I feel like creators are facing a lot today, because I think that as things have shifted where you can turn this into an actual career path and business, right? I think I'm going to start off with one that is not skill related at all. And you're like, Brian, this is not the point of this segment, but it is. Okay. Enjoy what you got to love this.
Ooh,
The reason why
maybe that
Tyler
is a
and I
skill.
have been doing this, it is the reason why Tyler and I have been doing this for so long is because we actually love this stuff. So I'm not saying there's a right or wrong way to approach this. Everyone's going to do it differently. You might be attracted to this because of the allure of clout and impressions and views. I'm telling you right now, I know for a fact Tyler and I didn't get into this because of views and like clout, right? And we're from an older school generation where this was quite honestly a hobby and a passion and something that we loved that turned into something greater. Well, now things have changed. Now that it is something greater, I tend to come across many creators who feel like they're chasing the algorithm, which is kind of important. But what I love about Tyler is that he does what he does. There's an audience for that. But I don't see any chasing. And I'm not saying it's wrong to chase the algorithm, but if you're so consumed by the algorithm and views, it's not sustainable for your mental health and for your love of this. So a skill, or to find it, you got to love just being in this space and creating no matter what the result is. And I think that will actually carry you through a lot of ups and downs, because at the end of the day, we're lucky to do this, but you got to just enjoy the process, enjoy learning new skills, enjoy being challenged. But really love the art of making something that you first enjoy or you care about, and then you throw it out to the universe, and whatever happens, happens. Tyler and I have all made videos that we thought would do really well and probably bombed. We've done videos that we thought were like, yeah, it's okay, and did well. But as you're around this more and more, I think it's really important to just enjoy the journey and just love doing this stuff. And I think that's going to carry you a lot. Now, we'll talk about skills, but I just think that I see that lack of passion or love. And when creators come up to me and all they want to do is talk business, that's not why I did this, quite honestly.
Well, I think that's more than just,
so sorry.
it's more than just feel good advice. Like, I don't think that's just sort of self-help guru advice. That's like good business advice too. I think if you don't, if you have a 9-to-5 job there actually is sort of more room for slacking off in a lot of ways. Like you don't have to love your job and you'll probably still get paid
True,
as long
true,
as you did the thing. But
true.
when this is all self-motivated and like you are your manager most of the time, you will struggle if you feel disconnected from it. Like if you don't have if you don't care about the work and you don't have whatever it is you're talking about, if you don't have a deeper interest in it, that will be a constant challenge for sure. I'm with you on that.
Yeah, yeah.
And yeah,
Okay.
it is a bit of a skill because like sometimes I just complain about doing what's actually an amazing job. So maybe
It
I also
happens to
need to
everyone though.
develop this
Like
skill.
it happens to everyone, right? Even the people with the most amazing, unbelievable jobs. How about this? Maybe this is from an outsider looking on the inside. Yeah, outsider looking inside. I love the NBA. I know half of these dudes are like, I gotta go to practice again, right? Like the end result is this awesome sport of athletics that I could never do, but I would love to do what they do, but I can't. And they're the people that are like, gotta go travel today, gotta go do another thing. And sometimes a little bit of that hits us, but I swear I just transport myself to like junior high Brian. What would I think if I was doing this today? And I think that helps keep me like appreciative and just like energized about it. Otherwise, I'm sure I'd get jaded, but I just want to do this as long as I can, dude. Like,
Yeah,
quite
that's
honestly.
the perspective of looking at teenager me. Like, what would I think of this? Is always
Oh
like,
my
oh, I
gosh.
would have killed for this. Yeah, totally.
Right? Like
So,
literally, like
yeah,
you would murder a
exactly.
man for
Yeah.
this.
Well, okay, let's do some specific stuff
Okay, so
too.
skills. Yeah.
Let's do like okay, very specific. Which video app would you recommend people learn to edit with right now?
Okay, so you know how you talked about in the beginning how
You haven't
we've been
bought
in
one
this for
yet.
a while.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
We've been in this for a while, so our answers will probably vary from different. But I think how about this? Depending on the media format that you want to pursue, whether it's a long form or short form, that's going to change the answer, right?
That is good to bring up because that does change my answer. So yes,
So for I've used it a little bit, but because my brain doesn't work that way, and I'd be the first to admit, I think you got to know CapCut if you want to be in the social media space. But at the same time, you also need to have this to kind of add the little extra zhoosh, right? The little extra polish. You still need whether it's DaVinci, Final Cut, or Adobe Premiere, you got to have one of those under your tool belt, right? Some people might arguably say two, but when I was a younger version of me, I remember this is crazy. I learned Photoshop and I learned Premiere by buying the Adobe books, okay? Opening the pages and doing the tutorials to learn these apps because and
I've been there.
did that college version of Brian know how valuable that would be today, right? Like how things would shift. So for me, I would say, okay, and your answers will be different. CapCut, and then one of those big three, right? Let's say Adobe, Premiere, Final Cut, or DaVinci. And it's a lot to learn, but if you really care about this, I think you will learn. Um, I would definitely say Photoshop helps. Photoshop helps a lot.
Whatever you do,
Like,
Photoshop helps.
yeah, yeah, it really
Yeah.
does. Whether it's a flyer or a YouTube still, which actually matters. And sure, if you get to the level where you can source all this stuff out, I don't. I have one person that works with me recently. I know Tyler has a smaller team as well. We don't have people that do, oh here, just take all this and some people do it. Everyone has a different strategy, but I would say those when I think about fundamental apps, yeah, what do you think? I don't know. I could be
No,
totally
yeah, you're on a roll. But yeah, no, I mean, totally agree. Like we're both sort of full stack creators doing the whole job ourselves. And I think you actually hit on something. CapCut, it's been bothering me the way how much they want you to pay. Like they've been advertising more within the app lately, so it's been pushing me away a bit. But I do think like the CapCut desktop application is actually kind of slept on. Like it is very full featured. It's crazy what you can do in there, and I don't know anybody that uses it heavily. But if you just try it, it's insane. I think that's a good one. That my only hesitation is their business model of like it's a very expensive subscription only it is still not a fully professional app. Like I totally don't mind paying for apps and I do pay for plenty of pro apps. But that's what kind of gets me. It's like the price, it costs as much as well, no, it's like it's comparable to certain Adobe apps, but you're only getting one video editor. Whereas both Final Cut and DaVinci you can buy for a single price, and
Is
are
there is
much more
there
full featured.
is there an app that off the top of your head or that you thought about that is because it also, we're kind of talking about the journey of the creator, like a first time creator, right? Are we saying iMovie is good? You know what I'm saying? Like what do you
Yeah,
lean? Is there one that you lean into per
I
se? I don't
want to
know.
say iMovie. I complain about every time I talk to anybody from Apple. I mean, I complained about it on this trip. Why does iMovie not do vertical? It's insane. It's
Dude,
such a
seriously.
miss because,
It's a oh my
I
god.
should be able to recommend iMovie. I do think having something very simple to start with is great. It gives you a path towards Final Cut. If you're just doing horizontal video, yeah, iMovie is a good place to start. But who is only doing horizontal video? Everybody,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know.
Which are like what new content creator is going to horizontal video first? This is
Yeah,
a really
and
interesting
or
thing
only.
because yes, because I know people that are short form content creators that want to come over and do long form, horizontal video. There's landscape video creators that want to do more short form video. These are very two different disciplines. So to your point, like Apple, what are you doing? Like seriously, like
Yeah,
what are
no,
you
it's
doing?
it's
Like
so
it's a
frustrating.
free app on your phone. Do
I think
something.
if people know they want to get serious about it, I think DaVinci is a great place to start. And the thing is, it's complicated. It's not great to start because it's easy, but it'll teach you everything, and you can grow with it forever. And at the start, you were saying, there's sort of two different paths of like, what do you want to specialize in? Like, are you doing long form? Are you doing really polished technical work? For those, I think Resolve is generally the better choice than either Premiere or Final Cut because you can start for free. Then when you buy it, you have it forever and you can take it as far as you want.
Yeah, that's alone is huge.
But I do still think Final Cut is the place to go for social. For like, if you want to do professional social stuff, like high volume, make it look really good, have full control, but do it quickly. Final Cut it's just the fastest place to edit. Like if you putting your clips in a row, I've said this a million times, but I think Final Cut is the best way to do that. And it gives you just enough control to do most professional stuff. So yeah, Resolve is like my default right now, though, especially the fact that it's free. Like, just try
Yeah,
it.
it's one of those things where I can use well I learned and grew up on I actually learned the first time I learned video editing was on an Avid machine. Then I went to Final Cut Pro before they turned it to kind of the new style of Final Cut.
Hmm.
And then I went to Premiere and then I can use Final Cut, but I'm just it sounds, your brain all of our brains are kind of ingrained to a
Yeah,
certain
yeah,
thing.
you
That's
get
why right you just
wired
you
to.
just know what yeah, you just know what works for you. But I haven't had the opportunity or time yet to actually play with DaVinci. And a lot of people for I feel like the past maybe 3 years specifically have really leaned into dude, DaVinci. You need to give it a shot
It has momentum that the other two don't. Even if it's still not dominant, the others don't feel like they've got that same sort of heat behind it.
in our space. Yeah, for sure.
And I mean, what other apps are important? I mean, so you mentioned Photoshop. Do you know what you would choose as the alternative, cheaper option? The subscription of Adobe definitely can keep people away. I will just go out there and say I'm kind of always an Adobe apologist. It feels like, even though I've got my problems with Adobe, I can complain about them for days. I just had problems with them this week, actually. But if you are making your living at this, just like it's not
Step it
that
up.
expensive for
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
what you're getting out of it. This is professional software. I've
Yeah.
been leaning on Lightroom and Photoshop for more than a decade now. You're going to have to pay to play in the no, if you want to be a pro, you need to kind of have
Yeah.
them because you're just expected to have them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Whether you think that's fair or not, that is currently the situation. Maybe that'll shift as now that Apple bought Pixelmator, but that's
I mean,
a
this
long
this is
shot.
a
We'll
really
see.
good yeah. This is a good point though that you made that I think we haven't touched upon as much as if your intention is to be in the professional space, right? Now that may not be everyone's intention, quite honestly. You
Mhm.
can make a living putting out content and you're not, when we say professionals like working with professional companies that are
Yeah, for
requiring maybe certain
clients.
assets or clients in a back and forth where it can be edited because it's on the same platform. Now, if that's not what you're looking for, that's fine. You could really, I mean, I've used Affinity Photo a lot, and I think that that platform is affordable. It deals with like layers and alpha channels and masks, and you don't even need that necessarily, but it does the job more than capable. If I was a young aspiring student, and I wanted to get if my trajectory was I really do want to be a professional, I'm gonna say just learn Photoshop. There's like the student edition, and like you said, it's not that much over time if you're a professional. You put it as part of your business, but if you're not, if you're still trying to dip your toes in the water and you're not looking to do that, I mean, I would lean towards Affinity Photo as kind of an alternative for Photoshop for me, and I've played with it extensively where I was like, oh, I could do this.
What would you say? What would you give as advice for people wanting to improve their ability to speak to camera, public
Mm.
speaking? This is something you are excellent at. When this is released, you'll have just hosted CES, co-hosted. I don't know what you'll
Yeah,
be doing,
yeah.
but it sounds like a big pain in the ass job that I don't have the guts to do.
It's a lot.
So
It's a lot.
yeah, but
Yeah, I mean, I would say, the biggest thing with camera skills. So just a quick thing. I went to school for broadcast journalism, and I was
oh,
just as raw
that's why
and
you're
wet.
good at it.
I was just as raw as everyone else. If I sent you my first demo reel tape, Tyler, you would
It would
laugh. You'd
sound
be like,
like
"Oh,
me today.
no, 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 not at all. You got a smooth voice, you know that." But the biggest thing, it's just like kind of like sports, it's about reps. And I think the biggest thing that I've learned and I've told people, and I think really matters, is if you want to be on camera, your first video, and we've talked about this a lot, will be better. Your first video will be a whole lot worse than your 10th video, then your 20th, then your 100th. But the key thing is not only are you learning to make new videos, I think the biggest key thing is what I do, and this may not work for everyone, is reading naturally is actually like a skill. And one way to help you do that is forget any grammar rules you've ever learned. I'm telling you, type the way you talk when you write a script. It doesn't matter whether you put a comma somewhere or a period, forget, throw that all out the window. Write the way you talk. It's going to actually help you then read the way you talk and feel more natural, because I think the hardest thing is to sound natural while reading. Now, all of our videos, we don't read all the time, but there are some videos that do require us to read a script or read
Like
something.
we are right now. We're reading all of this as we scripted this whole
This whole
podcast ahead of time.
this whole thing has been written, right? But for someone to be like, oh, when someone meets you, like, oh, you're just the same in person as you are on camera, that's actually a good thing, right? That means that, and in addition to that, being comfortable on camera, my biggest thing is to actually do not compare yourself to others. See who you like on camera. See some of the things like, oh, I like how that person does this. I like how that person does that. Make it your own. And really, we are all so unique creatures in who we connect with, how we connect with people. There is no right or wrong way. Some of the top creators are not the most polished on camera, so don't worry about that per se. But if you want to get comfortable and you want to get better and you want to give yourself the best chance for people to follow you and continue to follow your content, and that comes up, it's more than just how you talk on camera. It's like the information you give, your opinions, your quality. But if you're asking me, Tyler, about just presenting on camera, I think the number one tip that I can give to people, which is exact opposite of what you've been taught your whole life, is write the way you talk and then do it over and over and over when you read the camera. And I promise you, even just writing the way you talk in a script, you're going to come off way better than you ever did without that. It's a
I
subtle
think
thing.
that's fantastic advice. And I'm impressed that after broadcast school, actually, that you didn't end up with the broadcast way of speaking. Because I wonder if they still, they must still teach like the
Yes,
newscaster vocal patterns are just,
yes,
I mean, it's shocking to me that people intentionally still talk that way. Like, this isn't coming off
yeah.
well. This sounds completely disingenuous, right? Like nobody believes you, but it's
Yeah.
still the default. And
It's crazy. It's
yeah.
crazy. So here's why I probably don't. I have maybe like I learned all the rules, so I knew which ones I could break. But the reason probably why I'm not like that is because I did try to get into like, when okay, this is before YouTube existed. Sorry guys and gals. Like this is kind of crazy, right? You got to send out a demo reel to places. They evaluated you. I could not get an initial job in TV news, And so at that point, I said, you know what? Like, screw it. I'm going to figure out a way to be involved in media. I did like a local TV show that was like a magazine style show, covering like culture and stuff. But it was there where I was like, I'm just going to figure this out for myself and not play by the rules. And if there's a space for me here, there is, and I'm just going to make it work. So I actively they tried to teach, even when you watch my first demo reel, it's like this little pup trying to talk like a news anchor. It's so embarrassing, right? It's like, what are you trying to do? And it's funny how now, as media has evolved, how you're actually rewarded for sounding like a real human, believe it or not, right? Like, kind of crazy. So even the cadence and the inflections, it instantly, I'm like, it's almost like chalk against a board when I hear it. I'm like,
Well, and I think it's great for people to like, actually, maybe some practical advice is if you aren't speaking to camera right now, something I've done is like when you're driving in your car and there's nobody in the car with you and you got nothing else to do, turn off the music, turn off the podcast, and record with your phone and just start talking about something. Just like pretend you're podcasting, pretend you're doing your first YouTube video. And then the worst part, the painful part, listen back to it and be kind of honest about things like cadence and when to put inflections and not being too repetitive in your vocalizations. And there's a million things that lead to people building trust with you and being and not falling asleep. And, you got to listen back to it and be brutally honest about like, am I boring? Am I annoying? Am I talking too slow, too fast? All these things. And I mean, I'm still boring, annoying, and talk too fast and slow, but, keep listening to yourself and
keep the self-deprecation going like Tyler.
Yes,
and you will
exactly.
you will
Tip
go
number
incredibly.
Stay humble.
I will say, you know what? One other thing, when you say a quick tip or something that's really important, I think what people forget, and I think is arguably the most intimidating thing about this, is looking into the camera, looking into a dead piece of technology. And that's why people, and also it can be intimidating, and even a bright light, it can be intimidating, and just all of a sudden you're like, you shrink up. My advice to you is you've got to eventually look at the heart, like the lens, like the iris of the camera, and think of it as a person. Think of it as someone who you know. Think about it like your mom or your grandma or someone not intimidating that you could talk to. And it's the most unnatural thing, but once you make it the most natural thing, it does wonders. It really does. So
no, that's good. Yeah, that eye contact
learn to treat the camera like
huge.
Yeah.
Which it's huge, but I'm not doing it right now because I actually have two cameras recording me, and I don't know which one I'm going to use yet. So I'm a bad example today. I rushed this setup and screwed it all up for technical because I didn't troubleshoot well enough. So I don't listen to my own advice here.
Let me ask you a question, Tyler, to add on to this. What about camera skills? Because I came later to the game. Like, I knew how to shoot, write, and edit. But, once I went independent, I did have to learn how to shoot video. I had some friends to help me. I mean, I shot casually, but I wasn't, how about this? I wasn't Tyler proficient, but I was pretty proficient. So asking from you that works at an incredibly high level, if you had to kind of streamline it down, what are some tips from just a camera perspective? I'm not even talking about equipment, just maybe skills or whatever that is that can help people.
Yeah, I take it for granted because it's what I enjoy. That's like, I'm just going to keep playing with this, and every time I'll have a different setup, which is to my detriment. And basically I'd recommend people do the opposite and, basically hunker down on one system that works well enough for you. Don't complicate it. Don't buy way more accessories. Like, once you have enough accessories that like, it sounds good, it looks good, leave it for a while, like live with it and get used to that setup and know what you want to change before you make any changes. Don't just start throwing extra ingredients into the mix, because if your channel's not going to be about cameras, like you're not going to be talking about production, people aren't worried about what your production really looks like. Sometimes that's a challenge for me because I'm like, people expect it to look good, so I need to put extra work in. Where sometimes like I just want to turn on the webcam. I just want it to look like, I don't want to worry about it. And my problem is that I don't have that like permanent setup that I just flick a switch and start talking, but most people should, right? So it is about, there are so many cameras to choose from right now, which is great. They all have 10-bit, which for a while was not available, like 10-bit log. is transformational in that that's why every camera can look like a movie now. Every YouTube video looks pro right now. There's a baseline that you do have to meet, and that's having a soft light in front of you. Another thing is it shouldn't change. So for the first while, I was using window light a lot, but the problem is it shifts throughout the day. So that's the value of buying a light, is that it is consistent. So the whole time you talk, you're not getting brighter or darker, changing white balance. And you've got a microphone close to your face. Very important. And those are the most important thing. I mean, the rest of it you can kind of figure out along the way, but start with that basic setup, which that's a lot for some people. There's people with like big channels that are still sitting in front of a window and the microphone is across the room from them and they sound terrible. And it's like, a few of these little things would go a very long way. Just get the mic close to you, get a light on you, and you're halfway there.
And I would also throw in the equation is the best camera you have is probably right here for most people that are starting. And
he's holding an iPhone.
I can tell you
listeners.
at this level, I've put plenty of video footage in my videos that came from a phone, and no one has ever said, "Why did you put iPhone video?" Like, people care about the content and the storytelling, and you have something here that's already going to look incredibly good enough. And if you want to go and play around with ProRes 4K, like, you can. Like, that's an option to take it to that next level. So it's all here now, which is
But that's the thing, is like, when just a couple years ago, the basic kit was buy a full-size tripod, mirrorless lens with shallow depth of field, and either a big wireless kit or a big podcast kit, which would need like an external preamp. Or maybe you've got like one of the, Rode microphones that's on top of your camera, and then you have to be close enough to your camera. I mean, it was, and then you got memory cards and batteries to deal with all that. You can get started. You can not just get started. You can run a successful channel with just an iPhone and a wireless microphone and a lamp. You don't even need to buy a professional
100%.
light. Take a standard cheapo lamp and bounce it against a white wall and sit close to the wall. You're there. Like, that's most of what you need. And that was not the case just a little while ago. So
it wasn't.
It's crazy times.
I think the whole content creation space has had companies prioritize, like, what can, they see a lot of business, whether it's a hobby or a job or a passion. Like, you've seen companies kind of move towards like, ooh, what can we do for content creators? That just momentum wasn't there before. And specifically like the past 3 to 5 years, you're really seeing it. It's like, dang, like, it's cool to be part of this thing. I don't want to call it a movement because it's like, we're not that important, right? But it's cool to be a part of this thing that has literally shifted the economic like focus for some of these companies and decision making in their products. It's kind of crazy.
I mean, the things that we make do shift the world in ways. And I'm not trying to say we as in you and I, but even, when you find out that developers of these products watch or listen to what we say, when, and there's also like when things go viral enough, they can start to change the world too. Like, just a certain idea on TikTok spreads to the point that either a product starts selling well, or people start using an app more often, or they start using a filmmaking technique. Like, ideas really do spread, and you can be part of that, which is amazing. So I think maybe my last one is just like, have interesting, unique ideas. So a lot of the time when I open up a video from somebody that's like a new creator or a casual creator, they seem afraid to have a non-mainstream opinion about whatever it is they're talking about. Like, it's very like, let's play everything very safe. Don't say anything bad about the product. Don't, it's like, I don't know, find your interesting perspective. Like, how can you bring something totally unique to whatever it is you're talking about, and don't be afraid to stand out, and do something that you're not seeing other people do.
I think the other thing is, if you care about this stuff, and I guess the word care can be defined differently, is like, you can criticize a product from your perspective without saying it's totally shitty. Because at the end of the day, these companies, like, think about it, all these multi-billion-dollar companies, they're not trying to make shitty products in general. Now, maybe some of the low tier stuff on Amazon, which is deliberately trying to be crappy that they're selling for $10.
yeah, sure.
Yeah, they're trying to make a crappy product,
They don't
right?
care.
But these large brands to middle tier brands, they're not. They have budget constraints and decisions that they have to make. You can point out what doesn't work for you from a constructive way that is unique to you without doing the sensational clickbait thing. I think one thing that you've started to see is as viewers are more savvy, they actually hate clickbait more, and it's about building a long-term connection and community with an audience that trusts what you say and knows you're not just trying to go for the views. It's really opposite of what maybe content creation culture was, let's say, arguably 5 to 7 years ago. It's shifted a little bit. It's like almost the audience has grown up and matured with the creators. So there's a new type of way. Sure, there are going to be channels and people that will thrive off of the clickbait stuff. But I think long term, if you're looking to build something, you don't need to do that. And quite honestly, brands that see you're trying to be constructive in your criticism will respect you more for that instead of just going for like, this is crap, blah, blah, right? All that stuff. I don't even want to like, all the cliche headlines and things. You actually don't need to do that, which is might be counterintuitive to how you look at this space. But I'm telling you, it's evolved and changed, at least from what I've seen. And Tyler, I know you've been nodding your head, so you're like, yeah, like you align with some of the stuff that I just said.
I feel like that's what I was doing from the beginning. I was trying to I was willing to be boring sometimes when I feel like everything sometimes was more exciting than what I was saying. And I think, at times maybe I missed out on size because of that, but also something you touched on with like the negative reviews. I don't know. I've just always found it so boring to do the sort of like hate reviews, which is why there aren't. Yeah. I don't know if I have any like full negative videos, because if I start using and testing a product and I'm like, I just don't really like this, I don't care about it enough to. I only put out 2 videos a month. I don't release a lot. So if I'm like not into something, I'm like, I don't care. I'm not going to use it. I'm going to put it away and use something else. So I don't know. That's not necessarily the best policy. I know it's helpful. Like the criticism needs to be there, but I don't know. I get bored of like negative reviews, and that's why I generally talk about the things that I use the most often.
Yeah. I just think this sounds silly, I guess, or like altruistic. I think there's enough negativity. Like be critical, right?
Sure.
You don't have to lean into this whole low bottom of the like barrel negative stuff just because you think it's going to help your channel grow. And if it does, and that's your brand, that's fine. I'm just not here for it.
But also part of the thing is I really like the stuff. I like this stuff. I love tech, it is exciting to me. Like even when it doesn't turn out to be as good as it was promised or whatever, or even especially when we get used to a feature that should like, can you remember how amazing this feature is? Because we completely take it for granted, even though it didn't exist at all 3 years ago. I still try to keep the excitement because like, I don't know, I just enjoy life more when I look at it that way.
I agree. That is why you and I align and we're doing this podcast, because we got that vibe from each other. You know what I mean?
Exactly. Well, I'm glad we could finally do it, Brian. Have a longer chat. And if anybody isn't already watching Brian Tong on YouTube, then you should be. And I can't wait till we chat next time. And good luck at CES. And
you're coming on my pod next, buddy. I'm just letting you know.
Definitely. Okay. Well, keep an eye out for that. I'll let you know when it drops.
All right.
Thanks, Brian.
Cool. Thanks, Tyler.